He entered the bakery to buy an engagement cake and instead found the woman he once loved, holding a little girl who looked exactly like him. At that moment, the life he had built began to crumble. The instant Alex Sanders pushed open the door of the small bakery on Harmony Street, his entire future, carefully designed, perfectly organized, and strategically planned, started to crack in a way he couldn't yet comprehend. He had come for something simple, something almost embarrassingly mundane for a man of his status, an engagement cake, a symbolic piece of sugar and flour to seal an agreement between two powerful families. But the sweet scent of vanilla, caramel, and warm dough hit him like a memory he had sworn to bury long ago. The bell above the door chimed lightly and innocently, but Alex felt the tension rise in his chest, as if the sound were a warning. He entered tall, impeccably dressed, the embodiment of a millionaire CEO who never lost control. Even the soft winter sunlight reflecting off his blonde hair made him look almost unreal, like a man sculpted specifically for success. He rehearsed his order in his mind, wanting nothing more than to finish this quickly and return to his world, where emotions were unnecessary and predictable outcomes were guaranteed. But the universe had no intention of letting him leave unscathed, for she was there behind the counter. In a crisp, white uniform, slightly dirty with a touch of flour near her collarbone, stood Sarah Miller, his Sarah, the woman he once loved with an innocent certainty that seemed impossible in the cold, structured life he lived now. Her brown hair was tied in a loose ponytail, with a few strands falling softly near her cheeks, and her blue eyes, those same eyes he used to trace with his fingertips, lifted to meet his. For a moment, she too froze, not dramatically, not in horror, but with the stunned quietness of someone who believed the past had vanished forever, only to find it standing a meter away, wearing a tailored coat and a watch worth more than a small apartment. Before Alex could speak, before he could even swallow the sudden dryness in his throat, a movement caught his attention. A tiny girl, no older than 3, nestled in Sarah's hip, blonde hair that shone under the bakery lights, bright blue eyes, enough to steal the breath from his lungs, a pink dress, and on her head, slightly askew, a mini baker's hat that made her look like she had stepped out of a storybook. The little girl blinked at him with an openness so curious that something inside Alex twisted sharply. She was not just cute or charming or unexpectedly present. She was far too familiar. Sarah shifted slightly, tightening her hold on the child, as if bracing for impact. Alex's heart hammered, and for the first time in years, he felt genuinely unprepared. His world depended on numbers, forecasts, mergers, calculated decisions, but nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for this moment. He opened his mouth, uncertain of what he intended to say, unsure if he could even say anything at all. The bakery around them buzzed with soft music, warm lights, and the comforting aroma of sweets, but he felt as if the ground beneath him had tilted. Sarah's voice broke the silence first, gentle, yet tense. "Hello, Alex." It was all it took for his carefully constructed composure to begin to crumble, and for a shocking and electrifying question to form in the back of his mind. One he dared not verbalize but could not escape. Why did that little girl look so much like him? Alex struggled to regain his composure as Sarah's greeting settled in the warm, vanilla-scented air. He had imagined this moment countless times on restless nights years ago, when he still allowed himself the weakness of wondering what had happened to her life. But none of those imaginings came close to the raw truth of seeing her now. She looked older in the way people do when they have weathered storms rather than just time, but there was a quiet strength in her. Eyes that hadn't been there before, something both soothing and distant. And then there was the child, her daughter, watching him with open fascination, clutching the fabric of Sarah's uniform with one tiny hand, While the other played with the strap of the baker's hat on her head, Sarah managed a small, polite smile, the kind people wear when they are unsure whether to flee or pretend everything is fine. Alex forced himself to breathe, to return the smile, to remember how conversations were supposed to work, but his attention kept drifting back to the girl. She was studying him, with a seriousness far beyond her age, as if trying to decide who he was before anyone introduced him. Sarah noticed her gaze and instinctively moved the little girl slightly behind her, not protectively, but in a way that revealed she had learned to anticipate the unpredictability of the world. "I didn't expect to see you here," Sarah said softly, smoothing the child's hair. "This shop isn't exactly on your usual route." Alex tried to respond lightly, but the words came out harsher than he intended. "I'm here to order a cake for my engagement." The last word sounded heavier than it should have, and Sarah's fingers paused for the briefest moment before she continued straightening her daughter's baker's hat. She didn't congratulate him, didn't ask for details. She simply felt it. Her expression was controlled, but not cold. He realized that she had become skilled at containing emotions he once knew by heart. The little girl leaned into Sarah's arm, still looking at him with disarming honesty. "Your eyes are just like mine," she announced, with the gentle confidence that only a small child could possess. Her voice was soft and melodic, without suspicion or fear, just pure and honest observation. The world around Alex seemed to darken for a moment. Sarah's breath caught, her shoulders stiffening. Alex swallowed hard, feeling something powerful and unknown rise in his chest. He wasn't sure if it was shock or recognition or both tangled in something impossible to ignore. Sarah gently touched the girl's back, trying to redirect her attention, but Lily continued to look at him, waiting for a response. "What's your name?" Alex managed to say, his voice trembling in a way he hoped neither of them would notice. "Lily," the girl said proudly, pressing her cheek against Sarah's shoulder. Alex silently repeated the name, memorizing it with an intensity that frightened him. Lily, a simple, beautiful and soft name, now lodged in a part of him he didn't know was still alive. Sarah cleared her throat. "She's at that age where she notices everything," she said, avoiding his gaze as she spoke. "Don't take it personally." But how could he not? The resemblance was undeniable, the timing impossible to ignore. And the way Sarah said the words, careful, measured, almost rehearsed, told him that she had imagined this moment too, but with much more dread than hope. Alex felt the weight of unasked questions pressing against his ribs. He wanted to ask who the father was. He wanted to demand answers he knew he had no right to demand. He wanted to lean in to see her face more clearly, to hear her laughter, to understand why his heart reacted so violently to a child he had just met. But he remained still, aware that one wrong word could shatter the fragile civility between them. Sarah finally lifted her eyes, meeting his with calm determination. "Lily is my daughter," she said, her voice firm, softer as if she were bracing for his reaction. And even though she didn't give him more information than that, Alex felt the ground shift beneath him again. Something was unfolding there, something deeper, heavier, and much more transformative than a simple reunion. And although Sarah clearly wanted to maintain control of the moment, Alex suddenly knew with startling clarity that the truth hovering between them wouldn't stay buried for long. Alex left the bakery that day with nothing but questions. Yet each one felt heavier than the last. In the back seat of his car, with the city blurring past the windows, he found himself pulled back in time to the years he had tried so hard to forget. People like to imagine that the rich and ambitious chart their futures neatly, organized, without hesitation. But the truth was that Alex had stood at a crossroads, trembling with uncertainty. 3 years earlier, he had received the kind of position that could turn a promising executive into a corporate titan, a role that demanded absolute loyalty, relentless focus, and sacrifices he shouldn't hesitate to make. The promotion came with a warning disguised as advice. Anything that distracted him would jeopardize his ascent. And among those distractions, they meant relationships, especially those rooted in real emotion rather than convenience. Back then, Sarah was a dreamer with flour-dusted sleeves and notebooks filled with half-tested recipes. She showed him sketches of sweets in the margins of her books and talked endlessly about opening her own bakery, a place filled with light, color, warmth, and the kind of desserts that made people feel less alone. She was passionate and imaginative, a contrast to his polished and measured world. He admired her fiercely for it, sometimes even envied her, but he also believed that love could wait while opportunity could not. When the company's advice took him to New York for meetings that stretched until dawn, when they told him that his future required clean lines and clear decisions, he chose the path that seemed logical. He told Sarah they needed space. He told himself it was temporary, told everyone else it was necessary. He didn't see how deeply that cut until it was too late. Sarah didn't beg him to stay, nor did she argue or cry on the night they ended things. She simply listened, nodded slowly, and whispered that she hoped he achieved everything he wanted. That silent grace should have reassured him. Instead, it left him feeling like he had walked away from something irreplaceable. She moved out of the apartment they shared within a week, leaving behind only a folded apron and a handwritten recipe for cinnamon rolls, which still faintly smelled of her perfume. Alex buried himself in work until exhaustion blurred the days, convincing himself that ambition required a bit of emotional amputation. And because Sarah didn't reach out and he didn't dare to call, they separated as if the years they spent together had been a brief, impossible dream. But there were rare and unwanted moments when memories pierced him unexpectedly. Passing a bakery on the corner, smelling vanilla as he walked through the lobby of a hotel, hearing someone laugh with that same breathless joy that Sarah used to have when perfecting a new recipe. He brushed those memories away quickly, claiming he had no time to dwell on what was over. But some part of him always wondered what had happened to her life and if she had found someone to support her in the way. As he failed. Now sitting alone in his office, with the city skyline shining, behind him, Alex felt all those buried regrets rising like a tide he could no longer contain. Sarah had a daughter, a little girl with blonde hair and blue eyes, a little girl whose smile hit him with a familiarity he couldn't explain. He pressed his hands against his face, trying to steady his breathing, but the more he thought about it, the more the pieces aligned with terrifying precision. Sarah's silence, her sudden disappearance from his world, the timing that no longer seemed coincidental, the small, frightened shadow in her eyes when Lily said they looked alike. He remembered the last night they spent together before he accepted the promotion, a night both tender and heartbreaking, because neither of them admitted they felt the end approaching. That night kept replaying in his mind now, insisting as if it urged him to confront something he had spent years running from. If Lily was his daughter, if he had missed her first words, her first steps, her first everything, then the life he thought he had under control was built on an emptiness he never knew existed. He stood up and walked around the room as the realization deepened heavier. Sarah had raised that little girl alone. She had carried the burden of a secret while he climbed corporate ladders and posed for magazine covers that praised him for his discipline and clarity. But if she had truly believed he deserved to know, she would have found him. Which meant she must have convinced herself that Alex Sanders, the man he used to be, wouldn't have chosen them even if he had been warned. That thought alone cut him with a silent brutality he wasn't prepared for. For the first time in a long time, Alex wondered if the biggest mistake of his life wasn't the relationship he left behind, but the version of himself he allowed the world to shape. He had become everything his mentors admired: efficient, powerful, emotionally inaccessible. But at what cost? And now, as the truth approached, he felt the old world he had spent years building begin to tremble under the weight of something much more human and infinitely more terrifying. Responsibility, connection, and the possibility that his choices had left scars deeper than he ever imagined. He still didn't know how to face Sarah. He didn't know what questions he had the right to ask, or if she would even allow him to be part of the conversation. But one thing had become painfully clear: any future he thought he had planned was no longer solid. It was shifting, reshaping around a revelation he could neither escape nor ignore. And somewhere out there was a little girl with bright blue eyes who might be connected to him in a way that would change everything. Alex returned to the bakery 2 days later, although he told himself it was just because he needed to finalize the details of the engagement cake. It was a weak excuse, fragile enough that even his assistant raised an eyebrow when he cleared his schedule for the next day. But he couldn't bring himself to care. He needed clarity, answers, something tangible to ground the whirlwind of thoughts that had consumed him since the moment he saw Lily's bright blue eyes. The memory of that tiny voice saying they looked alike had replayed in his mind with relentless persistence, leaving him restless at night and unfocused at work. Even Cassandra, his fiancée, had noticed his distraction and questioned him at dinner, but Alex avoided her questions with a practical ease that left him unexpectedly empty. When he entered Sugar Blossom again, the familiar jingle of the bell carried a weight it hadn't before. The warm, sweet smell of baked goods enveloped him quickly, but instead of offering comfort, it heightened his attention. Sarah was working behind the counter, her hair tied in a neat bun this time, her uniform crisp and clean, but exhaustion subtly lingered around her eyes. Lily was perched on a small stool nearby, drawing with bright crayons on a sheet of parchment paper, humming softly as she worked. Sarah noticed Alex first, her posture stiffening imperceptibly, although she forced a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Back again?" she asked gently, though there was a trace of caution beneath the surface. Before he could respond, Lily looked up from her drawing and smiled with innocent delight. "Hi," she chirped, holding up a paper to show him a colourful doodle that resembled a cupcake wearing sunglasses. Alex felt the tension in his chest ease a little, surprised by how instinctively he smiled back. He approached slowly, aware of Sarah's watchful gaze. "That's very impressive," he said softly, studying Lily's drawing. "Are you an artist?" She giggled, nodding proudly, before returning to colour with determined focus. Sarah stepped closer, as if preparing for any conversation she felt was about to unfold. "If you're here for the cake, I've already started working on the design," she said, her voice controlled, professional but undeniably tense. Alex felt that, although that wasn't what had brought him back. He took a deep breath, searching for words that wouldn't shatter the fragile space between them. "Sarah," he began carefully, "can we talk? Not about the cake, about that day." Her eyes flickered briefly, betraying the storm behind them. She dropped the spatula. She was wiping her hands on a towel with slow precision. "Alex, I don't think there's anything to discuss," she said, though her tone lacked conviction. "You came to pick up one cake?" I gave him the details, that's all. But Alex was no longer willing to accept that. He looked at Lily, who was now humming to herself again, oblivious to the growing tension among the adults. "She looks like me," he said softly, his voice almost breaking under the weight of the words. Sarah inhaled sharply, her shoulders tensing as if absorbing a physical blow. "Sarah, please, I need to know." The room seemed to shrink around them, the warm lights of the bakery dimming under the intensity of the moment. Sarah stared at him for a long time, her expression shifting between fear, anger, and something else he couldn't decipher. Finally, she let out a slow sigh and leaned against the counter, as if standing had become too heavy. "The truth is complicated," she murmured, keeping her voice low enough so that Lily wouldn't hear. "And I don't want to have this conversation while she's right here." Alex felt her immediately, understanding more in what she wasn't saying than in what she was. But Sarah wasn't finished. She closed her eyes briefly, gathering strength before looking at him with a vulnerability that hit him harder than any accusation could have. "Did you walk away from us before you even knew there was an us?" she whispered. "I never wanted to burden you with something you never asked for. I had no reason to believe you would stay, even if I told you." Alex felt the words sink into him with a slow, crushing pain. He opened his mouth to respond, but Sarah shook her head, gently silencing him. "I'll tell you everything," she promised softly, "but not now, not in front of her. Give me a little time." He nodded again, though waiting felt almost unbearable. Still, he understood the gravity of what she was offering, the truth he had spent days fearing and longing for in equal measure. As he prepared to leave, Lily ran up, holding another drawing. This one, a stick figure with blonde hair and big blue circles for eyes. "Is this you?" she declared proudly, and something inside Alex broke completely. When he stepped outside, the sunlight felt harsher, the air colder, and the weight of reality heavier than ever. He had come to order a cake, but everything in his life was beginning to unravel. Thread by delicate thread, loosened by the innocent smile of a child who still didn't know the chaos that had been awakened. Alex barely slept in the days that followed, lying awake in the dark with the city lights flickering on his ceiling like restless thoughts that refused to quiet. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Lily's face, round, bright, angelic, and each time the resemblance hit him with a force that he felt almost cruel. He replayed his past with Sarah repeatedly, searching for moments he might have overlooked, signs he should have noticed, words she might have tried to say. But the truth was painfully simple. He hadn't been listening back then, too consumed by ambition to imagine that life could unfold in ways not outlined in his 5-year plan. Now, that neglect was echoing back to him in the form of a little girl who could be his daughter. His confusion deepened into something heavier, a mix of guilt, fear, and a fierce longing he hadn't expected. He wanted answers. Yes, but more than that, he wanted to understand what had happened to the woman he once loved and what burdens she had carried alone. His fiancée, Cassandra, noticed his distance almost immediately. At a charity gala, she poked him sharply when he didn't respond to a question from a senator's wife, her fragile smile whispering that he needed to pull himself together. Later that night, she asked if he was having doubts about the marriage, but he dismissed her with a practical charm that sounded empty even to his own ears. Standing next to Cassandra, surrounded by golden champagne, flutes and staged laughter, Alex felt as if he were living inside a glass box, well lit, admired, and completely suffocating. Sarah's little bakery, with its soft music and imperfect warmth, suddenly felt more real than anything in his polished world. On Wednesday morning, unable to bear another hour of speculation, Alex drove back to Sugar Blossom. The shop hadn't opened yet, but Sarah was inside preparing dough on a stainless steel counter, salt sprinkled over flour. She looked tired, her hair slightly disheveled, her posture tense. Lily was in the back playing with measuring cups, as if they were musical instruments. When Sarah noticed Alex at the door, her eyes widened in surprise, then softened with resignation. She let him in without a word and locked the door behind him, creating a fragile cocoon of privacy. They stood in silence for a moment, each waiting for the other to start. Sarah wiped her hands on a flower-covered towel before meeting his gaze with calm determination. "Do you want the truth?" she said, her voice firmer than he expected. "And you deserve to hear it. But you need to know it's not as simple as you might think." Alex felt his pulse quicken. "Just tell me, Sarah, I can handle it." She shook her head slightly. "Handling it isn't the problem. Accepting the consequences is." She moved to the counter, as if she needed something solid to lean on. Her eyes flickered briefly toward the back room, where Lily was humming to herself, unaware of how her existence was reshaping everything. "When you walked away," Sarah began slowly, "I told myself it was the right thing. You had dreams that didn't include small-town bakeries or the kind of chaotic life that most people lead. I knew you were choosing a future that demanded every part of you, and I didn't want to be the reason for your hesitation. But a few weeks after you left, I started to feel nauseous. I thought it was stress or the pain of losing someone I loved, but it didn't go away." She paused, her breath catching slightly. "Then I found out I was pregnant." Alex's heart skipped a beat. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words got tangled in his throat. Sarah continued before he could compose himself. "I wasn't ready. I was terrified. I was alone. But still I didn't reach out to you. Not because I wanted to hide it from you, but because I knew what your life had become. I watched you change during those last months together. Your focus narrowing, your priorities shifting, your world filling with people who expected you to become someone greater, smarter, more relentless. I convinced myself that you wouldn't want her, that you wouldn't want us. I wasn't going to beg for a place in a life you had already chosen without me." Her eyes sparkled, but she didn't let the tears fall. "And I wasn't going to beg for a place in a life you had already chosen without me." Alex stepped closer, trying to steady his voice. "Sarah, I should have known. I should have been there. You shouldn't have had to do this alone." She looked away, the pain tightening her features. "That's the thing, Alex. I didn't think you wanted to be there. I thought telling you would force you into a life you didn't want, and I couldn't be the person who trapped you. So I stayed silent. I built a life around her, and I told myself I made the right decision." A long, heavy pause settled between them. Alex felt the truth hit him with a sharp and irreversible force. Sarah wasn't hiding Lily out of spite. She was protecting herself, protecting her daughter, and perhaps even protecting him from a version of fatherhood he might have resented. But fate had thrown them back into each other's lives anyway, shattering all the assumptions they had made to survive the last 3 years. Alex finally found his voice, low and hoarse. "I want to be in her life, Sarah. I don't care how complicated it is. I don't care what it costs. I want to know. Oh, her. I want to know you again. I want to fix what I broke." Sarah's expression wavered, torn between hope and fear. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she looked towards the back room, where Lily had started to sing a tuneless lullaby, unaware of how her little voice had changed the trajectory of everything. "You can try," Sarah finally whispered, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the counter, "but nothing will ever be the same again." And for the first time, Alex didn't shrink under the weight of that truth. He embraced it. Alex left the bakery that morning, with the truth burning in his chest like a fire he couldn't smother. Sarah's words had rooted so deeply in him that the trip back to his penthouse felt surreal, as if he were navigating 2 different worlds at once. In one world, he was still the disciplined CEO, preparing for an engagement that promised strategic alliances and polished perfection. In the other, he had just discovered that a little girl with blue eyes and flower-dusted cheeks could be the piece of his life he was unconsciously losing. The contrast between these worlds became impossible to ignore the moment he arrived at the lobby of his building, where elegant marble floors and soft classical music suddenly felt cold, sterile, and deeply disconnected from the warmth he had just left behind. Cassandra was waiting for him up there, ready to discuss wedding details, with a folder full of fabric samples, seating layouts, and cleverly disguised invitations. She greeted him with a kiss on the cheek and a comment about how late he was, but Alex barely heard her as she spoke, outlining how their union would benefit both families and how the press coverage would be impeccable if they handled it correctly. He watched her with a strange and growing clarity. Sandra was beautiful, composed, bright in the way ambitious people are when their lives are built like equations. But she had never looked at him the way Sarah once did. Never with tenderness, never with admiration, never with anything beyond strategic expectation. He suddenly felt suffocated by the immaculate space around them and the weight of a future that felt less like a life and more like a prescription. When Cassandra finally paused long enough to notice his silence, she frowned, snapping the folder shut. "Are you distracted again?" she said, irritated, crossing her arms. "This is the third time this week. Are you having doubts, Alex?" Her tone was sharp, not hurt, more annoyed than concerned, as if his hesitation was an inconvenience rather than an emotional issue. Alex rubbed his hand over his chin, feeling the tension radiate through him. "It's not doubts," he replied, though he realized as he spoke that it wasn't entirely true. "Things are happening that I need to resolve." Cassandra raised an eyebrow. "Things? What kind of things?" He hesitated, knowing she expected concrete explanations, but the truth was too delicate and too new to be exposed to someone who viewed relationships as transactions, personal things. He said quietly, and Cassandra's expression changed immediately. She approached, her heels clicking loudly against the floor. "Alex, we don't have room for personal crises right now. The merger depends on this wedding. Do you understand how many people are counting on us?" Something inside him broke. He looked at Jessica, not at the woman he was supposed to marry, but at the version of himself he would have to become to be with her. A version that required dormancy, obedience, and a heart kept away from anything unpredictable or real. He could no longer do that. Not after seeing Sarah, not after knowing about Lily, not after realizing that his future had already changed without his permission, pulling him toward a life he had abandoned before it even began. He took a deep breath and met Jessica's gaze without wavering. "The wedding isn't going to happen," he said, and the simplicity of the statement shocked even him. Jessica stared at him for several seconds, her expression unreadable until a sharp laugh escaped her lips. "Are you joking?" she said, stepping back as if he had said something absurd. But Alex didn't hesitate. "I'm not." The air in the room grew tense, thick with disbelief and anger. Jessica's laughter died, replaced by a cold fury that sharpened every line of her face. "This is about another woman," she demanded. "Because if you think you can throw everything away for someone insignificant, she is not insignificant." Alex interrupted her, his voice firm. It shocked Jessica enough to make her stop talking. He swallowed hard, choosing his words carefully. "Her name is Sarah, and she has a daughter, a little girl who might be mine." Jessica's eyes widened, and, for the first time, he saw genuine astonishment break through her controlled demeanor. "You have a child?" she whispered, as if the very idea scandalized her more than the end of their wedding. Alex shook his head. "I don't know that for sure, but I intend to find out, and I intend to be a part of her life, if that's the case." Jessica slowly stepped back, her breath unsteady with indignation. "You're throwing away everything we've built for a child you didn't even know existed? For a woman who left you?" Alex exhaled, feeling the truth settle comfortably, solidly, within him. I'm not throwing anything away. I'm choosing the right thing for the first time in a long time." Jessica looked at him as if she no longer recognized him. Then, without saying another word, she grabbed her briefcase and left, her heels clicking like small explosions with each step. When the door slammed behind her, an unexpected wave of relief washed over Alex. For years he had moved through life like a machine designed for success, but in that moment he finally felt human again, fallible, scared, hopeful. Later that night, as he stood by the window watching the city that once defined him, he realized that the future he wanted was not built in boardrooms or ballrooms. It was waiting in a small bakery on Harmony Street, where a little girl with blue eyes drew cupcakes with crayons, and a woman he had once lost still carried pieces of his heart that she never asked for. And for the first time in years, Alex was not afraid of what came next. He was ready for it. Alex began to show up at Sugar Blossom with a consistency that surprised even him, though he tried not to make it obvious, spacing out his visits at first. However, no matter how much he tried to disguise his intentions, Sarah always seemed to sense when he entered the bakery. Her back would straighten, her hands would pause for a fraction of a second, and her eyes would soften in a way that suggested resignation mixed with something much more complicated. Lily, on the other hand, reacted to him with natural enthusiasm. She would squeal his name, sometimes mispronouncing it in a two-syllable melody, and run to him, her little arms outstretched, leaving floral fingerprints on his expensive suits, which he wore afterward as badges of honor rather than inconveniences. Every time she sought him out, something inside Alex stirred with a fierce tenderness he couldn't fully explain, even though he knew he shouldn't press Sarah for answers she wasn't ready to give. As the days turned into weeks, Alex found himself helping with small tasks in the bakery, moving bags of flour, fixing a flickering light, restocking jars of sugar, even though he knew Sarah could do all of it on her own. Still, she let him help without protest, and that small permission felt monumental. In the quiet hours, before closing, he would sit on a wooden stool while Sarah decorated sweets with steady, practical movements. Lily often sat on his lap, tired from the day, her head resting on his chest as she floated between wakefulness and dreams. Alex never imagined a child could fall asleep so easily against him, trusting him completely, without demanding any proof of who he was. The first time she did, he barely moved for almost an hour, afraid to disturb the fragile sense of belonging warming his heart. The more time he spent with them, the more vividly he realized how much life he had lost. Lily had a stubbornness, a playful mischief, and a laugh so bright it seemed to refill the room with sunlight every time she let it out. Sarah possessed the same gentle resilience he remembered, but now it was tempered by maturity and a strength that came from navigating hardships alone. Her dreams hadn't disappeared. Instead, she had shaped them around circumstances that would have broken many others. Watching her work flower into her hands, concentration etched on her forehead, lips curved in silent satisfaction. Whenever she perfected a design, she would pull Alex into a world that felt warmer and more real than anything he had ever built in the corporate towers of his success. However, beneath the sweetness of these new routines, doubt lingered between them like a shadow neither wanted to acknowledge. Sarah still kept her guard up, not harshly, but with the careful restraint of someone who had been forced to rebuild trust, piece by piece. Sometimes, when she caught him watching Lily with barely contained admiration, she would quickly look away, as if protecting herself from the hope she feared might draw her in again. Alex understood her caution. He even respected it, but his desire to prove himself grew with each passing day. One night, a storm arrived unexpectedly, soaking the streets and rattling the windows with gusts of wind. The bakery's closing time had already passed, but Sarah hadn't asked him to leave. and Lily had fallen asleep early, curled up on a pile of aprons in the back room. Sarah was washing dishes, her movements slower than usual, and Alex felt something heavy on his mind. He approached gently, leaning against the counter beside her. "You're quiet today," he said, not accusatorily but with honest concern. Sarah kept her eyes on the soapy water for a moment before responding. "I'm trying to figure out what comes next," she murmured. "For Lily, for me, for you." Her voice trembled slightly, and Alex felt the urge to take her hand, though he restrained himself. She dropped a plate, rinsed it carefully and dried her hands before finally meeting his gaze. "I never planned any of this," she admitted. "I built a life around Lily that made sense, even if it wasn't easy. And now you're here, and you're different from the man you used to be, and I don't know what that means." Alex inhaled slowly, choosing his words with the kind of precision he usually reserved for multi-million-dollar negotiations. "It means I'm trying," he said softly. "Not to fix everything in a day, not to undo the past, just to be here, to show you that I'm not leaving again." Sarah's eyes searched his, and for the first time since their reunion, she didn't look away immediately. The vulnerability that flickered across her face was so raw, so honest, that Alex felt humbled by the trust she was allowing to surface, even in such a fragile form. "Lily adores you," she whispered. "She doesn't understand who you can be yet, but she feels something. Kids are perceptive." Alex swallowed hard, both moved and terrified by what her words implied. Sarah leaned in a little closer, lowering her voice even further. "If you're going to enter her life, Alex, you have to be consistent. You can't disappear when things get complicated. You can't make promises you won't keep. She's never known what it's like to lose someone she trusts. I won't let her learn that from you." He didn't flinch. Instead, he nodded with a conviction that came from a deeper place than logic or pride. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, every word spoken with unwavering certainty. "I've made mistakes before, but I'm not that man anymore. I don't want a life built on business and expectations. I want something real. I want the chance to know her and to reclaim any place I lost in her life." Sarah's eyes softened, shining with emotions she struggled to contain. For a moment it seemed she might reach for him, but then Lily stirred in the back room, letting out a soft whimper. Sarah instinctively turned, her maternal instinct kicking in. Before thought could intervene, Alex watched her kneel beside the little girl, gently brushing her hair and whispering soothing words until she settled down again. The scene cut through any remaining doubts within him. This was where he wanted to be, where he should have been all along. The storm outside intensified, but inside the bakery he felt an unusual sense of calm, as if something long fragmented was finally beginning to come together. And when Sarah returned to stand beside him, her expression no longer guarded, but cautiously hopeful, Alex knew he was ready to fight for a future he once believed he didn't deserve. A future with them. Alex arrived at Sugar Blossom earlier than usual that night, long after the storm had passed, and the streets glimmered with reflections of warm lights from the shops. He told himself he had come to help Sarah close up, but the truth was that anticipation had been pulling at him since dawn, instigating him with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. When he entered, the bakery was quiet, except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint murmur of Lily giggling behind the counter as she tried to stack cupcake liners into a tower. Sarah looked up from wiping down a table and greeted him with a smile that was no longer guarded, though still tinged with caution. Something in her expression, however, hinted that she had made peace with the idea of him being present, at least for that moment. They worked together at an easy pace, sweeping the floors, organizing the displays, and washing the last of the mixing bowls. Alex found himself stealing glances at Sarah from time to time, watching the way she moved through the space with calm ownership and a kind of grace born not of elegance, but of resilience. Eventually, Lily grew tired and stumbled over to him, raising her arms in a silent request. Without hesitation, he picked her up, feeling her little hands clutching the fabric of his shirt as she rested her head on his shoulder. Sophia observed the scene unfold with a tenderness that squeezed Alex's heart, for it was not the distant sadness he sometimes saw on her face. It was a small but unmistakable glimpse of hope. When the last light of the display was turned off and Lily was snuggled up, in a blanket with her stuffed animal, Sophia gestured for Alex to follow her to the backyard of the bakery. He hadn't noticed it before, hidden behind a wooden gate. But the moment he stepped out, he felt as if he had entered another world. String lights crisscrossed the narrow yard, casting a warm glow on the brick walls and repurposed wooden crates used as planters. A faint smell of herbs mingled with the lingering sweetness of baked sugar coming from inside. Sophia crossed her arms, not defensively, but out of reluctance to expose the vulnerability she carried for this conversation. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began softly, her voice steady yet fragile. "About being here, about wanting to meet Lily, about wanting to fix things between us." She paused, breathing slowly. "You've changed, Alex. And I see that now, but the change doesn't erase the past and doesn't guarantee the future. I need to know that you understand how big this is, not just for you, but for her and for me." Alex stepped closer, his voice low but unwavering. "Sophia, I understand that I failed you before. I made choices that hurt you, choices that pulled me away from the life I should have fought for. I can't erase any of that, but I can choose differently now. I can choose both of you, not out of guilt or obligation, but because I want a life that is real. I want to be someone Lily can trust. I want to earn back your trust, not through promises, but through actions." Sophia's eyes shone with emotion, though she didn't look away. "And what about your old life?" she asked. "Your business, your responsibilities, the world you used to believe in?" Alex shook his head slowly. "Those things don't mean what they used to mean. They feel empty, without something genuine to anchor them. I'm not abandoning my career, but it's no longer the thing I'm choosing above all else. I lived that way, and it almost cost me my soul. I'm done living like a ghost in a glass tower." She studied him for a long moment, searching for cracks, false notes, signs of a temporary transformation. But instead, she found sincerity, a steady warmth, and a man who seemed deeply humbled by the second chance fate had unexpectedly placed before him. She reached into her apron pocket, pulling out a folded piece of paper covered with handwritten notes and bakery sketches. Alex recognized her handwriting immediately, the same loops and flourishes he used to admire when she scribbled recipes on napkins in their old apartment. "I started planning a bigger bakery years ago," she admitted softly. "Not because I thought it would happen soon, but because imagining it made the hard days easier." She unfolded the paper, smoothing the creases with her fingertips. "I never showed this to anyone. It felt too personal, too fragile. But if we're really going to try this, then you should see." Alex accepted the paper reverently, as if she had handed him a piece of her heart. He studied the sketches: wide windows, rows of display cases, a small play corner for children, and notes about seasonal flavors written in the margins. His chest tightened with emotion that he didn't bother to hide. "It's beautiful," he whispered, "and I want to help you build it, not to take control, not to dominate, just to give you the support you've deserved all along." Sophia's breath trembled, and for a moment she looked like she might crumble, but instead she took a step forward, closing the distance between them. "Then let's take it slow," she murmured, "for Lily's sake, for mine, for yours. Let's see where this leads without rushing or forcing anything." Alex nodded, overwhelmed with relief. "Slow is perfect," he said, his voice choked with emotion. Then, to his surprise, Sophia leaned in and gently pressed her forehead against his chest. It wasn't a kiss, nor a declaration, but the most silent and profound acceptance he could have wished for. He wrapped his arms around her slowly, carefully, as if holding something fragile and irreplaceable. In that moment, surrounded by the glow of the lights and the faint sound of Lily stirring inside, Alex realized that everything he thought defined him, success, wealth, reputation, seemed insignificant compared to the simple truth blossoming between them. This, right here, was a beginning. When Sophia finally lifted her head, her eyes sparkled with a tenderness he hadn't seen in years. "Welcome home, Alex," she whispered, echoing the words she hadn't dared to say aloud before. And for the first time in a long time, he truly felt that he was.